Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session. My name is Ecom, and so we have a lot of questions to cover this evening, and so we're just going to get right started. So since March, families have been faced very dramatically with being forced to accommodate for their children to do all of the activities that they perform in school, while schools have teeter-tottered between online and in-person learning, which came with a host of technological and logistical challenges. Parents have had to suddenly determine on their own effective ways for their kids to grow both academically and socially in the absence of the conventional school structure. As if that hadn't been hard enough, parents and children have also faced a barrage over the past year with uniquely enormous volume of stressors, not the least of which is deep anxiety and volatile opinions from adults about whether or not kids should be in school or learning virtually. And on top of that, there's healthcare. So in a sea of conflicting views about masks, social distancing, vaccines, and much more, parents have had to choose what voices to tune out and which instructions to follow. So how can we help children learn during this period of time and come out physically and emotionally stronger at the end of this pandemic? So here's our panel of pediatric nurse practitioners in a variety, working in a variety of environments and across the United States. And we'll start right with, that question.
Yeah, I can go ahead and take a stab at that one. I would love to hear the other panelists' thoughts as well. I think it's important to introduce to this concept to kids that, everyone does handle stress differently, and that's okay. It's okay if one sibling is not stressed at all and the other one is very stressed out. And it's important to communicate your needs to others, whether it's in your family or at school or in your friend group. And also, we hear this a lot, but modeling that behavior from parents. So just, seeing parents communicating with each other and with their kids about what they need. And, just building those strong relationships and speaking to others, when you do need help, and just helping children that if they are stressed or depressed or, feeling isolated, you don't have to deal with that burden alone. It's okay to talk to your family or your peers and to get help. And, maintaining connection with family and friends and developing healthy coping skills are really important as well.
Absolutely.
I'll chime in. I think resilience is a theme that we're going to hear about a lot tonight. But I think what is helpful and alleviates a lot of pressure for me as a parent is knowing that children are inherently resilient. They are flexible. They are far more flexible and resilient than we are as adults. And the most important, and the research would show us that the most important factor in a child's resilience is a relationship with a parent or caregiver. And so I think that can feel like a lot of stress as a parent or caregiver, but can also be can give us a focus of what we can do and what we can act upon in kind of honing down what's attainable in this crazy season.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback off of that and talking about other ways to foster resilience, which is an important trait, right? Not just during really stressful times, but also something to keep fostering when things kind of shift and change, because this is something you want. It's kind of like a fire drill. You want to have those tools and you want to be fostering those traits before we have to use them, right? And it's a continuous process, but other things that can kind of help with resilience and help with children is kind of developing their sense of competency. And a lot of that has to do with during this time, allowing them to make independent decisions, allowing them to do things on their own. I think a lot of times parents, either they don't want to watch their kids struggle, they don't want their kids to feel like they failed, or sometimes it's just easier. Parents like to try to do things for kids, right? And that's a really hard thing, I think, for any parent or caregiver to resist. But whenever there are opportunities where kids can kind of try something on their own within safe boundaries, that's a really great place where kids can learn that they're competent, that they're capable of solving their own problems. And the same thing I would say for failure, right? Like allowing kids a safe space where if they make a mistake, if they fail at something, it's not the end of the world, right? Because that allows them to not only learn from that mistake, but learn that failure is okay. And dealing with a negative emotion that comes with failure is a good thing, because that helps to build resilience on the other end afterwards. And part of that competency, I think, helps to increase their sense of control. That's another really big thing during this time. You know, as people, we all, no matter if you're a kid or an adult, we like to have that sense of control. And I think a lot of parents have struggled during this time because there's so many things that they have to do, the online schooling or this, and a lot of things feel out of control. And I think their kids feel that way too. So anytime you can introduce options and allow kids to make that decision, that's really a great thing to do. And it doesn't have to be like, it's not like, okay, you can go to school or not go to school. That's not an option, but it can be simple things like, do you want to do your math homework first or your English homework, right? Or do you want to do this and then that? So it kind of introduces the idea that they can kind of pick a timeline, even if the actual things they need to do, like take a shower or do this thing, is not actually negotiable. They can kind of pick how and when they want to do that.
No, those are all great points.
Time.
So I think that also kind of segues into the next question. In the absence of our usual infrastructure, what are ways to foster social development for our kids? Allie, can you speak to that?
Yeah. So my background is in child development, and this is something that I feel like I've spent the year talking about. And I think it is different based on a child's developmental stage and their developmental needs. Speaking towards younger children, I think we have the distinct advantage there that much of a child's social development occurs in the home in that phase. And so it's very strongly about attachments to caregivers and building some of those early emerging skills and to Luann's point, some of that early sense of self-efficacy within the confines of a safe environment. So I do think that while parents of young children will agree with me that this has been a tornado of a season, I can say that I'm grateful that for that population, a lot of what would be theoretically best for a child's social development is not necessarily inhibited by the ongoing social distancing and things like that. Of course, that differs as we get to extended family, and those relationships, those get more complicated and more difficult. But school age children, I think at that phase, we see that kids are starting to understand some of the constraints of social distancing and mask wearing, and are able to better engage and participate in those things compared to younger children. And that's where we have this opportunity for facilitated but lower risk interactions with peers. Some, socially distanced or somehow safer pods or play dates. And pods are kind of a different conversation, but pods can be a great opportunity for families to sort of find families of similar risk tolerance that have ideally similar age children as well, that can help facilitate that development. Teenagers obviously get a lot more complicated and have a lot more need for autonomy, and also simply just have more freedom. And so I think parenting teenagers through this is a conversation of trust, but also recognizing that their frontal lobes are not necessarily done maturing to make all of the decisions that might be necessary to keep them safe. So I think that's a bit of a tightrope walk in terms of allowing teenagers the freedom to be able to make these choices that we know that they're probably going to make regardless, and also trying to have those conversations that reinforce that trust between you, and also reiterate the necessary safety precautions in that population.
Most definitely. So how should we be navigating a healthy balance between technology that we use both as a tool for school and then also for communication? Lydia, can you give us some insight there?
Sure. So there's definitely been a lot of discussion about technology and children recently. And it's important to both, have a healthy approach to screen time when they're using it for school, and then also, how to switch off afterwards. I know we hear this a lot in child development, but children and teens, they really do thrive on routine and schedules and consistency. So I know in the morning when they're doing schoolwork on the computer, it is important that they get out of their bed, they get dressed and change out of their pajamas to just kind of get them in the right frame of mind. It is important that, children and teens do have a dedicated space that they can learn remotely and do all of their work that's separate from the sleeping area or, kind of the fun entertainment area if you have the space. Outside of school, you definitely do want to decide how much screen time is allowed just for entertainment, and as developmentally appropriate, it's important to get their input as well, because it's much easier to kind of do the screen time battle if it's something that the child has or teen has already agreed on. And then when that kind of time limit for the entertainment is approaching, always recommend giving them about a 15 to 20-minute warning, and then after that, they have some notice about when their screen should be put away. Also, specifically in the evening hours, just to make sure children and teens get enough sleep, it's important to limit electronic use as it gets close to bedtime, because, sleep is really important to help them stay focused and also be successful in school. And then again, including them in that discussion of what do we think a reasonable bedtime is during the pandemic, considering we've been in the house together all day. And again, that consistent routine is really important. And then after the schoolwork, it's really important to do things away from screen time, like family time. So, spending time together as a family doing fun stuff, it's really important. It gives them this emotional support that's really, really needed during this time. Like laughing and eating meals together, whether it's arts and crafts or another activity that the family likes. Just because everyone's been kind of trapped in the house doing schoolwork and homeschooling all day doesn't necessarily mean that we're spending quality times with our family. Also, something as simple as, getting them away from the screens by helping with a chore or doing an activity together, giving them that sense of accomplishment that oftentimes we're not getting during the pandemic because we're not outside of the home. And then particularly, as children get older into the tweens and teens age, having open and honest conversations with them about screen time, particularly social media. So being able to ask them, do you feel like being on Instagram or Facebook, is this energizing you, or do you feel like it's really draining you and making you feel down and depressed? And, talking to them before they start using those platforms. And it's okay if they've already started, but just having that conversation. How will we know if social media is becoming a problem for you? And, what can we do to make sure social media is a fun thing for you to do and not stressful? Because studies have shown that, spending a lot of time on social media, particularly looking at accounts of people that you're not friends with in real life can actually be really depressing. And again, just being available to your child. And something really, really difficult is modeling healthy screen time yourself. So, as parents and caregivers, it's easy for us to get sucked into work emails and other things just to relieve our stress after a long work day, but making sure that we're not asking our kids to do something that we're not willing to do ourselves as well.
Absolutely. And so in talking about technology, that also brings up the concern about long-term impacts as far as kids in the K through 12 education system and what impact it may have on their progress academically. Can you speak to that as well?
Yeah, so I think that's a really great question as well. Some research does show that remote education can be beneficial to some students, but it definitely does come with a lot of challenges, whether it's, mental, emotional, strictly academic challenges and social challenges. A lot of students are reporting just feeling a lot less motivated. There's a lot less accountability. If a child hasn't done their homework assignment, it's a lot easier to deal with the consequences when it's, from behind a screen instead of having to be face to face with a teacher, explaining why. There's also definitely, a sense of isolation and alienation. And particularly for our older children, losing all of those kind of coming of age experiences like homecoming and prom and big graduations and all of those parties that go along with it. School is often where children and teenagers are kind of defining who they are exactly by these social relationships. And, without those face-to-face interactions and, without being invited to try new things and join new groups and have these new experiences, the process of kind of developing that self-identity, it definitely will change. And, it might not feel as fulfilling if they're not getting all of these experiences. I think it is important to remember, though, that, we're all on the same page, which is a good thing. It's not like what one state or one city is struggling with the school arena. I really do think it's a country and even global issue right now, is that school is just looking a lot different. It's good to be challenged. So this is a great experience with technology, and it's a challenging opportunity for growth. And, for students and families that do have concerns, really don't forget your teacher is such a valuable resource. And they really are there to help students navigate, just as they're navigating through the changes in school technology as well.
Abdul, can you give us some input as far as parents who are worrying about lost school time? What strategies are there? I'm sorry, Luan, this question is for you. Can you give us some strategies about how to lessen anxiety about it that's surrounded around it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of piggybacks off of Lydia's answers about kind of how the virtual school and how this will change K through 12 education. And I think a lot of the anxiety from this comes from the parents, or maybe older teens who are at their later years in high school. And the answer is we don't know, right? Like, we do know that all this back and forth learning, it's not ideal, obviously, for them. It's not an ideal learning environment. But in terms of the long-term impact, that's really hard for us to predict. While we haven't been in a situation exactly like this as a world, we've certainly as a world faced many different issues, whether it was like World War I or World War II. I kind of feel like this pandemic feels a little bit like that in many ways, and just how catastrophic and widespread the impact has had on everyone. So I think, in trying to cope with parents' anxiety about their kids' future and what this will mean, trying to reiterate the fact that everyone is in that boat. All these educators, other teachers, whether your kid is moving, later into a different grade or transitioning to college. I know a lot of colleges have been very understanding of this time. They're eliminating some of the other traditional barriers. They're changing their essay questions. I mean, they're really trying to work hard with the students, so that the things that you normally would be able to do, like, doing after school activities and these types of things that you can't do, aren't, weighed against you negatively. I do think communicating with teachers is really important. I know that is really hard right now. I've had a lot of parents give me feedback, like, I've been trying to reach out and I just don't hear back from them. And knowing that they're really overwhelmed too, with everything going on. But as much as you can, getting a pulse on how your kid is doing, getting signed into those online accounts, so that if they are struggling in a particular area, that you can catch that a little bit earlier rather than later, and reaching out to the school to see if there's anything they can do, any tutoring opportunities or any additional things that they can do to help. If your kiddo is having anxiety about school and how to navigate all of that, making sure that they have an opportunity to express how they're feeling, whether it's just identifying what emotions they're feeling or kind of working on different coping strategies. That can be something as simple as, deep breathing exercises that you guys can do together, or journaling. If it progresses to something where their anxiety about school or about social circumstances is really getting in the way of their academics, at that point, I would probably recommend maybe talking to a counselor or maybe even psychiatry if needed to help with those symptoms so that they can learn additional coping skills.
Abdul, now for you. Can you talk about what benefits of the features we have seen that were in place before COVID and how they've been beneficial during the pandemic?
Yeah, sure. So a little bit of background in the Coachella Valley, we have primarily the families are working in the agriculture fields. So unfortunately can't work from home. And so the parents are still going out and working in the fields. That being said, the family system and in place in the Coachella Valley is considered a multi-generational dwelling system. So you'll have aunts, uncles, grandparents, and even great-grandparents in the home. And so sort of there's this community family structure that has been in place even prior to the pandemic, which has really shown some benefits during the pandemic with keeping that structure in place, the routine in place, and the children or the kids that we have come in haven't had as much disruption as that could have been if they didn't have these structures in place. And so we also see that many of the first generation immigrants who have navigated the school system, it was difficult for them. They didn't have any help from their parents or anybody. And so now they're helping to navigate the changes in schooling now with online schooling or a hybrid system. So we're seeing a lot of benefits of having those multi-generational families right now.
And so we've also seen a lot of kids who were struggling within the traditional school setting, but actually now during virtual learning have excelled. And so what do you say to parents who now want to keep their kids at to do school virtually moving forward? Allie.
Yeah, I don't think we have a tremendous amount of research, to Luann's point, on the effect, Luann and Lydia's points, to the effects of how virtual schooling is going to look in terms of what the outcomes are academically. But I can say anecdotally, I think we have seen a lot of different populations that have done well or even thrived in these circumstances, these unique circumstances. I have patients who are neurodiverse with autism spectrum disorders who have done much better with more self-directed learning and with fewer sensory insults, working from home and working by themselves. I have patients with ADHD who have benefited from self-management and being able to kind of condense their time of focus a little bit more, as opposed to spreading it across the whole day, with kind of the filler of what traditional school can sometimes look like with classroom management and things. I have patients with social anxiety who have really done well, although I would challenge that population at what cost. So, and I think that's going to be the other side of the coin for any of these choices to be made, is we know there are benefits to traditional school in terms of socialization and peer relationships and the finding of oneself and one's place in the world, and a lot of that does really occur within a traditional schooling environment. But we also recognize that that's not necessarily the best placement for everyone. So I think historically homeschooling has been an option for more resourced families, and virtual school gives an alternative to that in a way that might make it more attainable across all socioeconomic levels. But again, it's hard to say without the research to back up the quality of the instruction and educational outcomes.
And so to move more to the physical health of our kids, we've talked a lot about their mental health and their development. What existing barriers what existing barriers to health have you noticed has been exacerbated for our patients? And how do we work around those as providers? Abdul, can you speak to that?
Yeah, definitely. So the clinics that we work in are a full service partnership clinic. So we work, I'm in the community mental health clinic, but we work closely with primary care, pediatrics, and family medicine as well. And so what's happened is that in our community, there's a lack of technological infrastructure, if that makes sense. So getting good, reliable internet is difficult to come by. Many families don't have a desktop or laptop for the children's. Their primary mode of connecting to the internet is through cell phone data, like their cell phones and cell phone data. And so what we try to do is bridge the gaps where we can, because everything has moved into like Zoom appointments now, right? Everything's everything's over Zoom, and so they unfortunately they can't make those appointments. They don't have that ability. And so what we do is we actually are going out in the field now, with our PPEs and trying to meet them where they're at. And so those are some ways that we're trying to work around it. We're working with the county government itself to try to establish better relations with tech networks to establish wireless and internet in those communities that haven't had it before. So that's what we've been focusing on.
And so for the rest of the group, how are you guys keeping your patients on track with, their well child checks, their vaccines, things that actually need to be physically done in an office, not through, a virtual visit? Anyone?
Yeah, I can comment on that. So our my office at Ryan Health, we're doing just a ton of outreach to patients who need things like physicals and vaccines and blood work. Especially in the pediatric population, it's really important that preventative care is not delayed. So the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, who we've all become very familiar with throughout the pandemic, and also the American Academy of Pediatrics, does recommend continued well visits, continued immunizations on schedule, not at any alternative schedule, and not to be delayed, particularly for those younger children below 24 months of age. That's when we really see a lot of the foundation for that vaccine schedule. So really, really important that we continue to outreach to those families and make sure we're as accessible as possible. And, it's great that we're providing telehealth, but for those in-person visits, it's really important that we have, bodies in the clinic to provide those services.
Absolutely. I know for the FQHC that I'm working at right now, we're fielding a lot of questions as far as young kids who are not in preschool at this time and are at home, and concerns from parents as far as when they do return to preschool, are they going to experience, is their immune system going to be ready? Are they going to have more sicknesses than they have already had in the past? And so I've had to give a lot of reinforcement and reassurance as far as for our healthy, typically developing kids. We do expect that once they are in a larger group of kids that, they're going to pass germs around, and we do expect them to have, 7 to 10 viral illnesses a year. And once we enter kindergarten or preschool, we're, really reinforcing for them the need to wash hands frequently, to use a tissue to wipe their noses, to cover their mouths, things like that. And those viral illnesses are usually short-lived, no more than 10 days. But that can be nerve-wracking as a parent, especially when you have older kids that are in bringing germs home to, back home from school, or you're having to take time off, or you have a kid that's just fussy through the night and you're not sleeping. So I do understand the stress that goes along with that. So that is something that we can mitigate on some level, but life is unexpected, and so just knowing that that might happen and will happen is helpful to do. So we kind of finished the main bulk of our questions. We have some other questions here though concerning kids during the pandemic. And so Leanne, there is a time, this may be a time of grief where kids are more aware of death, and more so than they usually or typically would be. Are there ways for them to understand that life isn't usually as dangerous?
Yeah. So I think the concept of grief is really difficult no matter when, but I think somebody in this group had even mentioned that one of their families had been to a funeral like once a week for the whole month of December. So certainly during this time, and certainly in, I think, people with different socioeconomic class, the risk of death from COVID is definitely higher. But in terms of kind of how kids cope with grief, that can look really different depending on the child and depending on the age and where they are developmentally. A lot of times, their moods might be a little bit all over the place, a little bit erratic. So they're not always going to be sad, and they might go from, playing happily one minute to really sad the next. And so those are kind of things to monitor for as a parent, and to understand that that's okay, and developmentally that is very appropriate. And some people feel that, playing and kind of engaging in a different way is a way for children to cope with that grief. When explaining and talking about death with children, it's really important to make sure you understand what's kind of developmentally appropriate for that child's age group. And that a lot of children, especially as they're younger, they can take things very literally. So you actually want to avoid trying to use phrases like, "Oh, grandpa has gone to sleep." And the reason for that is because we don't want them to start to think that sleep is a scary thing or sleep is a bad thing. You can say things like, "Grandpa is gone. Grandpa's eyes looks like he's closed, but he's not sleeping. He's not here." Trying to be honest and open to them about what is happening, and just trying to answer their questions as honestly and directly as you can. I know during this time, funerals may not be in person, they might be more virtual, but even in the future, if we are able to attend funerals more in person, I think that really comes down to the parent, the child, the age of the child in terms of whether or not you should make a child go to a funeral. Certainly funerals can provide a lot of closure for people, but they can also be really scary. And so that's kind of a conversation that you'll want to have with a child. A lot of the kids I've been seeing, the parents have been basically letting them make that decision. And if they do decide to attend a funeral, like making sure to set up expectations of what they might see or what they might hear, and just providing space to process their emotions. You can model that for them too, right? Like you can show them that you're feeling sad about a loss or something like that, that they don't have to hold it that all in, and you don't have to hold it all in either, and show them that you're this armor and that you're not feeling sad at all, because that doesn't reaffirm to them that you empathize and understand what they're feeling. Yeah, I think those are the main points. Oh, and sometimes with with deaths and with grief, you can see sometimes regression in behavior. So that's something to monitor for, especially in younger children. You might see bedwetting or baby talk. And some of that, I think, is that anxiety and those fears kind of playing out in different ways. And like I said before, if it starts to get to a point where their mood or their anxiety is getting in the way of their sleeping or their interactions or their school, that might be a time to kind of seek more professional help to help with the grieving process.
Absolutely. And then we've focused a lot on ways in which parents are that support for kids, be it for school, for development, for physical, in a variety of ways. How can we as parents make time to make sure that our needs are met, that we are whole, that we are able to fulfill all of these new hats and wear those hats that we haven't had to in the past? Allie, can you touch on that?
Yeah, I would love to. SelfCare is the name of the game this year, I think. And I recognize that self-care is a privilege. Self-care is a privilege that comes when a lot of other needs are met. But I would also encourage parents out there that there are parents and caregivers, that there are a lot of things that we can do that are free, that are available, and a lot of that really does require a little bit more structure. And I think structure is something that we as adults have struggled with along with our kids in this season that is so kind of out of the norm. And thankfully, structure is something that is free, but requires some self-discipline, I guess. I think things that should be a priority as a caregiver for self-care are definitely sleep. Like Lydia said, putting down our devices. We're not always good at that. I am not always good at that. Ensuring that we go to bed at a reasonable time. Ensuring that we wake up at a reasonable time. I think that's something that I hear from kids and from families frequently right now is, they're rolling out of bed and getting on Zoom 5 minutes later, and that does not set us up for success as adults or as kids. And so setting that alarm 15 minutes earlier and taking the time to shower and dress and maybe even practice mindfulness, just taking a moment to sit silently. In my house, it's a very short moment, but just time to kind of collect my thoughts and have some awareness about my day and my body. I think exercise is another one that the time resource is finite, but even just a short walk can really have significant improvements on mood. So I think sleep, moving your body, taking some moments, if brief, for yourself, and also when able, just choosing foods that make your body feel better, as opposed to things that I think we're all sort of seeking comfort food, and comfort food is a good thing for caring for our souls. And so I think balance is an important part of that too, of caring for our souls and caring for our bodies. So I think there's a place for all of it.
Absolutely. So here's a question from one of our attendees tonight. What are good screening tools to assess risk for depression and mental health concerns? And anyone can jump in. I know I personally have used for depression, of course, the PHQ questionnaire. Of course, that's the ubiquitous one. But just really, I think for me, going through those questions, and really sometimes kids are not quite, don't quite understand what the question is asking them, and rephrasing it in a way for which they have an understanding, especially those first two questions, because you can get false negatives, and then from there you can address the problem. But anyone else, what other scales or tools do you use?
I really like the SCARED. That's a really good one for anxiety, and it has a pediatric and adult and parent version. So, the child can answer questions more geared towards them, and then the parents can also answer questions about what they're seeing as well.
And let me see, I believe we have another question here. So when extended family moves into the home to help, but then will leave after the pandemic, how can we help kids cope when they leave?
I think that, speaks a lot to, all the changes that are happening during the pandemic. And, like we talked about that feeling of isolation and disconnection from our friends and family. So, getting used to having another family member in the house and then having that person go away after the pandemic is definitely going to be an adjustment for a lot of children. Particularly if that family member lives far away and it's not, they can just drive down the street to see them on the weekends. So, using those technology options, if you have them available, like FaceTime and phone calls, even, sending letters and postcards can be really therapeutic for children to stay connected with those relatives if they're seeing them less than they used to in the past.
Another question, how can providers address the changes in self-esteem and weight due to lifestyle changes?
Yeah, I can comment on that one as well. So, the pandemic has definitely led a lot of people, myself included, to just inactivity and also poor diet because, like Ali mentioned, a lot of us are seeking comforting foods right now, which is important for self-care, but also to balance, which, those in combination can lead to weight gain. It is important, though, to be careful about discussing things like body mass index or weight directly with children. I would always emphasize the importance of nutrition and exercise for a healthy body, not because of the way you look or how you look in your clothes. Childhood dieting can be really dangerous and can predispose children to pretty serious eating disorders later in life. I think it's important to model healthy behavior. So, a parent, a caregiver, or a grandparent, try to avoid complaining about your body and also belittling others, because of their body in front of kids. And, it's unfortunate, but that's, just something that's so embedded in our society is to be overly critical of our bodies and the bodies of others. And, eating healthy foods and staying active yourself. Maintaining the healthy lifestyle for kids. So, we do recommend an hour of exercise every day and setting those screen time limits and getting moving together as a family is important. Diet with lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, avoiding juice and soda. And then as a parent, remembering, the parent or caregiver is in charge of when and what is served, but it's really up to our kids to decide how much they want to eat. So, don't be too aggressive about cutting kids off or making them finish their plate, because again, that restricting amounts of food can lead to sort of a fixation on food, particularly junk food. And, kids without our intervention are much better than adults at knowing how much food that their body needs, and it might vary a lot from day to day. Also eating in a predictable pattern. So, if you can manage to eat dinner together at the table without a TV, that's really ideal and can really help kids understand a healthy relationship with food. Also, like avoiding TVs in the bedroom is another recommendation from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And also something to consider is that weight gain sometimes is a symptom of depression or anxiety. So kind of getting to the root of that issue and making sure we're addressing that as well.
All good points. And I think also for me in practice, just letting patients and their families know that we too, we're human and, we're going through the pandemic as well. So, we are struggling and sometimes, nutrition can be difficult. Doing all those healthy things that we're advising can be difficult, but it can be done and being consistent can be done. Here is another question. Let me pull it up. From the audience. What are signs of burnout in kids due to virtual learning? How can we get them back on track with more virtual school this semester? I know we've kind of touched on some of that, but any additional signs that we should be looking out that are big red flags?
I would say just in terms of mood in general, watching for big changes in behavior. If a kid is usually really outgoing and they're more isolated, if there's a lot more tearfulness or worry or, physical complaints, a lot of times children don't really know how to verbalize their feelings. And so a lot of times that will come out in physical ways like headaches or stomach aches or things like that. So monitoring for those kinds of things. Sleep changes in sleep can be another symptom of mood changes or maybe the burnout. And then just, I would say in terms of how to combat that, I think that really varies. A lot of our children aren't really taught emotional tools. That's not something that a lot of schools focus on. And so even teaching them how to identify what they're feeling and different ways of expressing that, right? It doesn't always have to be in words. It can be through a picture. It can be through a poem. It can be through art. Music, different ways of kind of expressing how they're feeling emotionally. Burnout is one of those really hard things to treat. Even before this, I had a lot of teens that would struggle with lack of motivation. And that part is really difficult. Part of the way that we build resilience in children is trying to find more intrinsic motivating things rather than just purely extrinsic ones like stickers or game time or this or that. And really giving them a sense of being a part of a community, if there's ways that they can kind of see what they are learning can impact the people around them, or especially as they get older in those teen years, how they can maybe adapt what they're learning someday to what they would like to study, what they would like to do. A lot of times that gives them that sense of competence and builds more of that intrinsic motivation. Other ways to help with focus, I think taking structured breaks, provide feedback to the school. That was a big one at the beginning. So many of my children were getting so many assignments because it's the first time they've done online school in this setting, and the teachers are just learning about it as well. So as parents, really trying to communicate like, hey, this is too much, right? My kid is going to school all day, sitting in front of screen and then doing homework and all these assignments all night. And just be that broken wheel, right? That squeaky wheel. Don't let that go, because the more times they hear that feedback from parents, hopefully they can adjust that curriculum as well.
And to go further, how can we give hope to our kids for the future? Anything we can do specifically as parents? Anything we can do specifically as providers?
I can talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely.
I'm starting to have a lot more kids coming in and teenagers coming in asking about what's happened, like what's going on in our area, because we're having mass vaccinations right now, like in the fairgrounds. And so they're asking like, okay, when is it our turn, or when is, what's going to happen, and how's it looking? And so just being as open and honest with them and letting them know what the steps are, of course, like appropriate to age level, but and I think that also instill, like going back to the previous question, that's going to also instill a little bit of hope as well. I don't know, I'm personally feeling a little bit more hopeful because we're starting to get a grasp of it a little bit better in California, but they're asking the questions, and so at least that's what we're seeing over here. And so just being open with them and letting them know, these are the steps. This is, when you can expect some changes in our community, and how to go from there, and to continue being safe, until we get to that point.
I think for me, at least, in clinic, we typically have a health fair every year. And so that planning starts around this time, and our community is very aware of that. and also our community garden as well. So still moving forward with those anticipated events and showing that excitement, still doing the signs, things like that, generating that excitement that would typically be there, even though there will be changes. It might be scaled back, that, you know, a lot of different things might be there that weren't, or vice versa, but just still being as excited as we would have been for in the past for those things, and giving hope as far as that's still going to be there. That's one thing I can count on happening and look forward to. All right, and then another question. Could we give examples of kids that we've cared for as providers who are doing well, who are flourishing during the pandemic? Because I think we all need those stories to help us know that we're accomplishing and doing what we are needed within our communities. Anyone would like to share?
Yeah, so I can share about that too. You know, just touching on what Ali said earlier, I feel like my patients who have social anxiety or are just on the shy side actually happen to be doing really well with virtual learning right now. So they're really happy with how everything is going. I've also had a lot of patients who have, you know, behavioral disorders or issues and tend to act out in the classroom. You know, if they're being in that environment at home and have more family support, they're also really thriving as well, and, you know, are excited to get back to school because they've seen that, you know, the classes are working for them. So that makes me feel hopeful as well.
Oh, yeah, I've also had, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Some patients, like especially with like ADHD, who typically kind of struggled with like note taking in that setting, be able to be like, yeah, I really like having the virtual classes. I can pause, I can kind of do things on my own time. I can go back and rewatch a video if I don't feel like I understood everything. So some of those people have really, I think, excelled academically because they've been able to kind of tailor fit that to their learning needs a little bit better.
Ali?
Yeah, I would just add that some of my favorite conversations this year have been parents who have, for lack of another option, become their child's teacher and either homeschooling or virtual schooling, but parents who are much more involved in their children's education than before, and hearing them rave about their child's strengths or the things that they have learned and the progress that they've made, whereas they really wouldn't have that same account or that same experience. I've seen a lot of parent-child relationships grow through uninterrupted together time.
I think for me, a particular patient comes to mind. They have many specialists involved in their care, and through the pandemic, the parent unfortunately lost their job. They were able to get community resources to take care of rent and food and those things. But in that happening, the parent was able to keep up with their kids' medical needs more consistently, and we've seen improved health for that child. And so while it's not great that this parent is struggling economically, it's great that there was a safety net in place, and now this kid is on the right track for their health. So all right, and so if anyone doesn't have anything else to add, I'd just like to thank everyone for attending tonight. I would like to just see if any of the panelists have any parting words to share, any advice, anything else that hasn't been said before we go.
I'd just like to share information about some concrete services as well. You know, a lot of the self-care and the resilience is kind of a moot point if families don't have their basic needs met. So internally, what I use at my organization is a platform called Aunt Bertha. However, it is accessible publicly through the website findhelp.org. So this will address any of your patients, you know, if they need a food pantry, if they need housing, if they just need items like diapers or blankets or toys, if they need a transit to doctor's appointments or to school, healthcare, if they need money. So if they need help paying for school or education, even paying for gas, childcare, education, legal assistance, job placement. It's a whole bunch of different resources just to make sure that their basic needs are met. And again, that's findhelp.org.
Anyone else have any parting words of wisdom? Well, if not, I just want to thank our panelists for their insight, their hard work, dedication to their patients, and for their participation tonight. Thank you to the audience for attending and for your questions. And I've learned a great deal tonight. I hope you have, and that the advice and insight that we have will be helpful for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.